Your knees are not supposed to go over your toes when you squat. Or at least that's what we've been told. I found a study that might say otherwise. Let's go check it out. The first study looked at compressive forces between the knee, hip, and low back upon performing a squat that was allowed with knees over the toes and a squat that was not allowed with knees over the toes. The study did find that with a knees over the toes squat, there was a 28% increase in torsion at the knee joint as compared to a squat where the knees were not allowed over the toes. The study found that that increase in knee torsion was due to increased quadricep and hamstring activation to allow stabilization of the knee joint during the squatting exercise. The study found that when knees were not allowed over the toes, increased compressive forces were found in the hip and low back, compensating for the lack of flexion in the knee joint, causing abnormal or unnecessarily large compressive forces at the hip and low back, which could lead to injuries. It makes sense. They found that when somebody loaded more weight on their squat, they had increased compressive forces on their hip and low back, which could lead to further injury as well. Overall, the study found that increased flexion tensile force at the thoracic and lumbar joint segments was increased in the squat where the knee was parallel to the toe. However, when the knee was allowed to travel past the toe, those flexion tensile forces were much less, and it allowed for a more appropriate and less injury risk squat exercise. So in summary, with that study, essentially, it may increase hip and low back pain issues if you perform a squat where the knees are parallel to the toes and the knees are not allowed to go past the toes. Another study looked at back squat versus front squat and what happens at the knee during each respective squat. The study found greater upright trunk posture with a front squat versus a back squat. The greater upright trunk posture angle with the front squat did cause the knees to travel past the toes, whereas with the back squat, the knees did not travel past the toes. The greater upright trunk angle in the front squat did cause the knees to move anterior to the toes. The study ultimately found that with a front squat, it is necessary for the knees to travel past the toes in order to initiate proper form for the front squat, whereas with the back squat, it was inconclusive. They didn't necessarily demonstrate whether or not the knees should or could not move past the toes. The next study looked at differences in shoes, whether it was a weightlifting shoe or a running shoe, and it looked at the difference in dorsiflexion angle at the ankle during the squatting exercise. Now, in general, dorsiflexion, healthy dorsiflexion at the ankle is necessary in order to allow a proper form squat during a squatting exercise. The study found that the weightlifting shoes were flatter and did not have a heel lift as compared to the running shoes, which had about a 2.5 centimeter on average heel lift in the shoe. The study found that the weightlifting shoes allowed less forward trunk lean, improved knee flexion, and improved ankle dorsiflexion kinematics during the squatting exercising, allowing for an improved squatting form versus the running shoes. And the study ultimately concluded that the weightlifting shoe allowed further anterior knee displacement or allowed the knees to travel past the toes to elicit more of a knee extensor or quadricep muscle activation, which is the desired response with the squat exercise, versus with using a running shoe, which did not allow that knee extensor or quadricep activation to occur as much as with the weightlifting shoe. So ultimately, this study found that allowing the knee to travel past the toe was necessary in order to elicit muscle activation of the quadriceps to allow the desired mechanical and muscle response from the squatting exercise. And this last study looked at anthropometric characteristics. If an individual had short legs but a long torso, anterior knee displacement or knee over the toe squatting was less likely to be found. However, if an individual had longer leg or femur length and a short torso, anterior knee displacement or knee over the toes was necessary in order to complete a properly formed squat. The study also found that a wider squat stance would cause less anterior knee displacement over the toes during the squatting exercise versus a narrow squat stance, which would cause more or increased knee anterior displacement over the toe during the squat. So essentially, based on body type, it may be necessary for your particular measurement of your body to allow a little bit of anterior knee displacement or knee over the toe during the squatting exercise versus somebody that has different anthropometric characteristics. So in conclusion, are your knees supposed to go over your toes during the squatting exercise? Well, ultimately, it depends. It depends on your anthropometric characteristics, it depends on your shoe type that you're using, and it also depends on what your goal is with the squatting exercise. The one major exception being knee rehabilitation patients. If they're doing a squat with knees over the toes, it might cause undue stress at the knee joint, which can cause undesired mechanical reactions. It might be a little bit too much stress on that particular area, so knees over the toes will likely want to be avoided during knee rehabilitation exercise. So in conclusion, yes, your knees can go past your toes. They're not going to explode or combust. It's all good. Don't stress about it. Go ahead at the gym. Allow your knees to go over your toes. Be smart. If they hurt, then try to modify it. But the science in this paper helps clear up some of the misnomers in healthcare and in fitness, whether or not your knees can go past your toes. If you're having some knee pain, check out this video above, and I'll see you over there.